Mr. Mayor,
Good morning.
I can finally say I'm one day ahead of you.
Dave, it's a very low bar. And what time is it there?
5:30, Saturday morning.
That's not too awful.
No, it's not bad.
Hopefully you got a coffee.
I've got a coffee right here, Bob.
We've got an observer.
Good morning.
Morning. Are we expecting Mark? No. This is it. Carolyn's not here.
Aaron's not here. I've encouraged Aaron to come back to this table.
Sorry?
I've encouraged Aaron to come back to this table in our recent discussions, just as a note.
Jess, did you hear from Marilyn?
No, I did not.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome all of you to the December 13th Mayor's Leaders Table meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of this name First Nation. Our clerk this morning will be Miss Nicolina Vercar, who's wisely turned on my mic. Thank you very much. Today's Mayor's Leaders Table meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. Members have been granted the authority to join us electronically, and we have David Whitty from New Zealand this morning, I gather, or Saturday morning. Welcome, Mr. Whitty.
Hey, welcome. Thank you.
First item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Vercar, we have one, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Agenda item 5A, verbal discussion regarding Mayor's Leaders Table, next steps, adding PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Motion for adoption of the agenda is amended. Moved Ms. Hayes, seconded Mr. Moss. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Donna Hayes, seconded Mr. Horbaczewski. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Agenda items, and there is really only one. It's a verbal discussion, Mayor's Leaders Table, next steps. And Mr. Sims, you've got a wonderful presentation. I'm impressed, thank you, including circulating the latest commentary from the Beacon, which is always a good guide for City Hall.
Thanks, Your Worship. Good morning, and good morning to Dave. Good to hear you're in New Zealand. I'm just a little bit envious. So this really is, it was just talking points that I put down just to introduce the subject, and then Jessica made it look beautiful on the traditional template, so thanks, Jess. So I just thought, in support of the discussion this morning, just to kind of do a really quick recap, so it's fresh in your minds. So as you recall, the original Mayor's Leaders Table grew out of the Task Force on Resilience and Recovery. Remember COVID? Remember that place, that thing? And at the very beginning, we were all worried that the economic impacts would be severe. And so let's figure out how we're going to grow out of that. And surprise, surprise, the economic impacts were severe in a positive way. So very interesting. So that gave rise to the second Mayor's Leaders Table, gave rise to the Infrastructure Ask Working Group, among other things. Donna was on it, and Dave was as well. And as well as a number of people that self-selected to that group from a large cross-section of the community. And out of that, we had these 5 sort of priority projects. And truly the highest priority, I think, in everyone's mind would have been the work around the hospital, NRGH, the new patient tower, the cath lab, the cancer center. And then there was some other stuff that was also important to the community. Everybody's acutely aware of the housing crisis, and the South End Community Center, we're just getting so much pressure on our recreational amenities. It's, which is kind of tied to the housing question as far as upstream work. So that was the impetus of the findings, I should say, of the Infrastructure Ask Working Group, and along with the recommendation that the work continue. And then, so in the fall of 2022, there was an election, and then in early 2023, the mayor struck this committee again. So it was a little more of a modified terms of reference. It was a little simpler. It was just, a little bit more flexible. Although we are still supported through the city's Legislative Services Department, which is quite a process. It's defined by bylaw, defined by legislation, but defined by policy. I don't know who's running Natalie? Thanks. The next one. Just a real brief. This is directly out of the terms of reference that the mayor put out. So it was just continue the momentum for advocacy was really the community unity and cohesion, especially around infrastructure, large community-oriented infrastructure. So that was a big push. Again, loosely translated, that's the work around the hospital. I won't mention the Public Works building, even though I've got some biases there. But oh wait, I just mentioned it. The other is just really working in collaboration with the business community, et cetera, and all of the furthering of the social and economic well-being of the community. Next. Yep. Just as a refresher, the terms of reference was that we put out in February of 2023, had a 2-year term, but I think we got our first meeting around June. So, and as I mentioned, this is all run through with the support of and through following the policies of our Legislative Services Group, who say that they've done 126 meetings this year so far. So that's a bit of context for the volume of work that a very small dedicated group puts together. Okay, Natalie. So some of the early discussion, there was a lot of discussion over a great number of meetings, but I just kind of picked out some of the earlier discussions, just some highlights in my mind. One of them was this idea of supporting the Prosperity Corporation. 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, it was pretty fledgling. We're sort of looking for the CEO, who's sitting on it, how's it, it was just getting funded at an early point. The table recognized the criticality of having Sunamo as a partner, and then the other one that's really quite large was integrating VIU into the larger community. But you're also seeing the challenges that have slammed all universities with the changes to immigration, which is beyond our control directly here. Thanks, Natalie. The next one. So just a quick touch, what did we do? We've done quite a bit of advocacy in terms of the patient tower, the cath lab, support for the Fair Care Alliance. I think that was critical, and that sort of lined up very nicely with the priority all through the iterations of this group. And then there was significant discussing, again, around this idea of equitable housing and Dave's work on Housing First Plus. That was really quite, quite involved and quite detailed that this working group looked at. And then we had some more, broadened out with the work that the city was doing in support of the Health and Housing Action Plan, the organization around the South End Community Centre, which, is starting to bear some fruit and starting to see some action. So that's, some of it obviously we can't share, but it's good news. So those are just a few of the things that we talked about. Next one, Natalie, please. And I just snipped this from the Prosperity Corporation's website. Councillor Hemmons here was talking about what the work of NPC was at one of the budget discussions that we were having, and it really struck me that there was a lot of parallels with this working group. So, Natalie, can you just zoom in? Because some of there's 15 items, and it might just be worth kind of pondering that, or maybe we can just leave this slide up, I don't know. But it just, when Councillor Hemmons was mentioning it during the budget meeting, there was like, I'm kind of checking my box in terms of, or checking the boxes in terms of what this group was supporting as well. So, yeah, obviously, things like the Nanaimo as a transportation and logistics hub was like, wow, that's a pretty strong, community infrastructure-based project, and, the airport, the port, et cetera. Healthcare Center of Excellence, skilled and talented workforce. All of these things are really overlapping with the work of this group. Your Worship, I have a couple of slides there that also just talked about the systems planning organization, which was, you can just maybe jump to one, but back to this one, Natalie, please. This is their mandate directly from the city's website as well, is just really about trying to have that coordinated approach for work around the health and housing issues that we have in the community. Worship, I think that's sort of my thoughts. I think one of the philosophies I live by, especially in my professional life, is what's the problem we're trying to solve. And so that's the challenge, or maybe the question for the working group, is what's next for this group. Natalie, if you could go back to the NPC stuff, that would be great.
Sorry.
Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, and if I may, I'm not trying to say that this group takes credit for this, but individually members of this group and others in the community have done a lot of work in the last couple of years since the original Mayor's Leaders Table was set up. And I want to go through a couple of things to when we talk about, for instance, and I'm going to just go through it the way it's set out in the first slide, Nanaimo Regional General Hospital Patient Tower. We went from a place where the Minister of Health was saying, and I mean this as kindly as I can say it, go pound sand, to a position where both major political parties that are now neck and neck in the BC legislature have committed themselves to a new patient tower. Not the Cath Lab, both of them, but that will come in time. And so the Fair Care Alliance has moved that ball down the field a very, very long ways. In terms of equitable housing, Mr. Whitty and many others, and his report, and various groups in the community, we have to celebrate that Cornerstone is up and operating across from the police station, that the Heart and Hearth program is going to see some very tangible results in the community, not without opposition in neighborhoods. I acknowledge that and the stressors that creates, but that's coming on board. A number of units have been built, more commitments. I think a greater realization that my not favorite theme in the sense that I take any joy in it, but the concept of secure and voluntary care is now part of the political discussion at the provincial level, which is an important aspect of dealing with the range of people unhoused in our community, the number of which still remains by estimate between 900 and 1,000, perhaps more. The community fiber optic network, lots of progress being made there. TELUS is making a major investment in the community. The Cancer Centre, underway, not quite as fully a creation as we would have liked, but nevertheless there. The South End Community Centre, I will only comment in a very discreet way that the city's been taking major steps towards that with a lot of cooperation and interest from various members of the community. When we talk about purpose, working in collaboration, I'm going to confess publicly and openly, I'm disappointed that we haven't been able to achieve perhaps as much as any of us would have liked with Snuneymuxw First Nation, but they have had a lot of things to deal with directly, including the involvement of the provincial government around the old Tally Ho site and various other issues. The city continues to work, however, collaboratively, and as a matter of fact, we have a protocol agreement working group meeting set for later next week. In terms of resiliency, we've probably come back better than many people expected, and we never drifted down as far as we could have, I suppose, either. Housing continued to be built, building permits issued in significant numbers in the last 2 years. Certainly, we're not going to see a banner year this year, but relative to what Nanaimo's numbers normally are, we'll still break 200 million comfortably. And that is still a remarkable achievement. And quite candidly, notwithstanding the province had us tentatively somewhat on a naughty list for housing creation, our numbers in fact exceeded the expectations or wishes, directions, directives, whatever you want to call it, from the province. The SPO is up and running, and although there is some concerns expressed again by various members of council and others, the fact is the SPO is leadership has secured Travelers Lodge for the kind of facility. It was a complete waste of a structure that could serve a valuable community purpose. And that follows on Dave Whitty's concerns around housing and attracting and care and attracting the interest of the provincial government. With respect to the Prosperity Corporation, I think everyone's generally pretty happy with the hiring of the CEO, which took some time. And we're starting to see that gel. And more importantly, as it appears, we're facing some more challenging economic times based on what's happening around the world, including the U.S. election and the implications of that for Canada and this province in particular, particularly around softwood. I met with a representative of Western Forest Products yesterday, but also at the same time, a representative of a company in the interior that manufactures modular homes who's thinking it's maybe time to relocate to Vancouver Island and is looking at Nanaimo. So there are a number of things, I think, to celebrate. And again, I'm not suggesting the Mayor's Leaders Table, believe me, by any stretch, take credit for it. But in terms of analyzing and looking at where we're at and how much has been achieved, I think it's a good point to do that. But for me, the question then becomes, and that is the question, what are the next steps? What is it we should be doing, could be doing differently? Particularly, I'm concerned about ensuring that Synamic is more intimately involved or integrated into this group. Do we have new goals? Do we decide to become what I will call and I don't mean this disrespectfully, a modern version of the Yes Committee, where we set out to the province, if they're willing, all of the capital projects. One of the things that clearly, if Mr. Walsh was able to be with us this morning, would be pointing out that ND is so far overdue. The high schools, I think, as old as I am, are pretty close to it. Not that I'm suggesting replacement, of course, but I'm not stuffed with asbestos either. So there are a number of things where we need to settle on a list with the province. The port continues to work very hard to secure significant funding. I think there is a growing recognition that we are the port city. Talk of enhancing Alberni so that goods get shipped across the island and transported by barge as necessary to Vancouver, reducing congestion in the Sailor Sea and all of those things. There are a number of things I think that are percolating. But in the background of all of this, I think we're all very conscious of the fact that the implementation of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People has created a great deal of uncertainty. It's generated a lot of hope, expectations that frankly may be far beyond the reach of society and government to achieve generally, and that worries me. I see potential for significant divisions and problems with that because of the uncertainty. We are, as everyone knows, in a unique position in British Columbia, 216 First Nations, I believe, and the vast majority of this province not covered by treaties. Synamic's position, as I understand it from their website now, is they talk about unceded territory here in Nanaimo, even though it's a treaty nation. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that issue, and the integration of and by that I mean that we're all at the same table with Synamic is very important as to how we develop as a community and how we actually achieve reconciliation, maintain our prosperity, and enhance the facilities and the infrastructure that we need as a community of choice in this country. Is one of I don't know what the latest numbers will reveal whenever they're published, but we were one of the 5 fastest growing regions in the country. And so the stressors on us are enormous. Our university, which has been a singular achievement in this community since its days as a college, facing the challenges it does with the federal government's, and I say it quite bluntly, unwise decisions around foreign students, not recognizing the impact that that has had in a positive way on this country and on our post-secondary educational system generally. So there's a lot out there. So pardon me for dribbling on, a phrase that always makes Councillor Hemmons laugh when I talk about it. But it's time to talk about, I think, next steps in the sense, what is it we're going to do? Are we useful? Are we achieving anything? Are we moving forward? So as not unexpected, Donna Hayes is first through the gate. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I have to say that I'm actually really excited we're having this conversation today because since the inaugural Mayor's Leaders Table in 2021, I've seen massive change from where we were then to where we are now as a community. I mean, you referenced Fair Care, you know my passion about healthcare and what we're doing there. And actually, Fair Care's intention was to end after our provincial election. But reality is we actually have a formalized strategic plan and a formalized budget moving forward. Our budget this next year is over $200,000 to educate and create opportunities around the healthcare conversation. So reality is for Fair Care, our work is actually just beginning. And we've just realized the opportunities that are open to us as a community on the healthcare conversation that I don't think we actually realized when we started the conversation and what community actually means. And so for us at Fair Care, community is actually all of Vancouver Island, and that's where we're growing to, is growing that entire conversation around what fair and equitable care looks like. We're super excited about it. There are huge opportunities coming our way. And to that end, it also brings me to this conversation today and what I personally think next steps are. And I should say that I'm back at the Nanaimo Port Authority Board as their board chair.
Thank God.
And my comment there, and thank you to Mayor and Council for their appointment to that board. My comment there is when I look at what's happening with the port, I've been back at the board now for under a month, but about 3 weeks ago now, we signed an agreement with SFN that changes the face of what the port growth will look like and what being true partners in community looks like. And I think, you know, between the work we're doing at the port, the work that the city is diligently working on, and I know that SFN is interested in being in that conversation. I know the university does a huge amount of work with them. I think there are great opportunities for us moving forward as partners. So I want to thank Mr. Sims for including the priorities from the Prosperity Corp, because even though Colin has invited me to lunch and I've been to some of their dinners and I was one of the speakers at the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance on hospital infrastructure, I actually hadn't seen their priorities. So that's great to see. Thank you for doing that and tying that back to us, because it does tie back to us. What I personally think next steps are is creating a strategic vision for the city of Nanaimo, which will extend through the community of Central Vancouver Island. And what I mean by saying that is, so I think we have all of the components. So we have a really great OCP, the Reimagine Nanaimo process. I think I participated at 6 different events. And I have to tell you, it's a really great OCP. It contains a whole bunch of pieces that are strategically important to us, like a logistics hub for the port. But at the end of the day, it's a land use plan that needs to be implemented into an overarching strategic plan that has truly stated mission and vision statements for our community. So I'm talking blue sky, big vision pieces. So when I sit at the table, whether it's the healthcare ecosystem or whether it's the port, or to be honest with you, I was at the Premier's lunch earlier this week, and I got the opportunity to meet with Minister Bailey, by the way, who's our finance minister, and our health minister, who was not there. We all graduated from NDSS, actually, which I'm pretty excited about. And speaking with Minister Bailey about port opportunities and healthcare opportunities here, very excited about what can be happening Central Vancouver Island. How many municipalities in Canada, other than large urban centers, so I'm talking about Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, have a port authority, have a university, have a tertiary level hospital? So I'm not talking about community level, I'm talking tertiary level hospital. Have, you know, the university that we have all of these components in one place. I can't tell you how many tables I sit at where they say, hey, we should be comparing ourselves to Kelowna And I'm like, yeah, they don't have a port. So they don't have the opportunities that we have here. We have some opportunities that are so completely and totally unrealized here, but we need a strategic plan that we are saying this is who Nanaimo is. These are what our core values are. These are what our mission and vision statements are. And then I think what we do is through what we see is happening with priorities for Prosperity Corp, is let them infill some of those pieces, bring those businesses that need to be here to fill those pieces in. Right now, I know PDC will be engaging in January in a healthcare economic study. What is the economic impact of healthcare in our community? As a city that has a tertiary hospital, it's massive. It's not just about the hospital and staff who works there. It's about every medical office. It's about every health and wellness provider. My hope, I know it will start with, what is the impact of the nursing program? I'd love to see a cancer tech program. I'd like to see us providing our own isotopes for the new cancer center that's here, and that is in Victoria, so that we are self-sufficient, not waiting for the isotopes to be flown over to us from Vancouver. I think that our opportunities here are massive, but we don't actually have one document that says, these are all of the opportunities. This is our overall strategic mission and vision for the Save Now. So I'm just going to share with you one of the thoughts, and I've already had this conversation at the Nanaimo District Hospital Foundation table. I've had it at the port table. Deb Sosi and I have had this conversation about a year ago, is that all of our main organizations have strategic plans. So if I was giving you a presentation today on the Port Authority, and we just did a quick strategic review yesterday of our plan, I would tell you that the Port of Nanaimo is actually the Port of Vancouver Island. That our strategic plan talks to the three main things that every government wants to talk about. And they are core relationships with your First Nations and engagement. And I just told you we signed an agreement with them about 3 weeks ago that allows our $120 million deal at Duke Point, which is phase 3, to go forward. But our phase 4 plan includes us growing to the size almost of Prince Rupert. Can you imagine the job opportunities that are there? It speaks to our carbon footprint and what we will be able to do if ships are actually docking in Nanaimo, where we have the deepest natural seaport in North America exists in Nanaimo, 6 meters off our berth face. And I tell you, when I talk about that, when we go to other countries and I'm in a conference in Hawaii in January, and we talk to those guys, there's a lot of interest in having the deepest natural sea berth in North America. When we look at how we can create a green change to BC as a whole and what that looks like. There's 240,000 chassis that deliver products to Vancouver Island every year. What if we implemented rail as part of our conversation and got those chassis off our roadways? Imagine what the infrastructure cost impacts would be, what our carbon footprint change would actually look like. And of course, sustainability, reliability, and redundancy under one heading. We saw in 2021 what happened with climate change, and we had a climate change conversation yesterday, and how Nanaimo can be part of those redundancy issues where basically we had to shut down the other side of the Salish Sea because of massive flooding over there. We have the ability to offload ships here. We can go directly up the Fraser on barge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How about food sustainability on Vancouver Island through creations of a logistics hub? And I can go on and on and on. That's just the port. If I switched hats for a minute and talked from the healthcare ecosystem and talked about what a tertiary hospital means and gaining the 18 programs that we are lacking, and the promise of a tower we get is just the promise of a tower. I've been in meetings this week already with VPs at Island Health about how soon can we act on the cath lab? Is there something we can do sooner rather than later? And there's really some tangible work that can happen there. But what Fair Care is actually going to do is be opening the conversation to what the definition of fair and equitable healthcare looks like for everybody living north of the Malahat. On January 9th, I'll be participating with the presidents of all MSAs, or medical staff associations, which are all the various doctors at every hospital on Vancouver Island, to talk about what the real needs are of patients in their areas. I can tell you right now from a story I was sent last week in Port McNeill, they're going to talk to me about transportation, getting their patients from A to B, and what does that look like, and how do we solidify that. I can tell you out of Campbell River, they're going to talk to me about lab techs and lab services. They've gone from 13 to 4 lab techs. If you hear about their hospital shutting down and their emergency shutting down, it's because they can't take a blood sample from you if they only have 4 lab techs when you arrive there. Fair Care is expanding their conversation and would love the opportunity to come to a conversation where all of these groups, the university, that's what Deb and I talked about. Let's talk about the strategic plan of the university and where do all of our strategic plans actually cross each other and formulate them into a master strategic plan for our city. So when we are standing in front of the province, and I can tell you right now, we're in the middle of, we've requested a presentation on healthcare at AVICC, and we are in the middle of actually putting together an island-wide healthcare summit that you'll see more information coming forward on, where we expect municipalities and MSAs and provincial leaders all to be in the same room to talk about healthcare. But imagine if we could talk to the province and the federal government about who we are as Central Vancouver Island, the conversations being led by Nanaimo, because that's where these infrastructure pieces are, and what our impact can be as a community, which is not just, what is our population in Nanaimo now, 108,000 people? No, to start off with, I can tell you Fair Care is 500,000 people in our conversation, bailiwick, and we're expanding that to 1 million people going to Victoria in some of our conversations. That's what our conversation is going to be about. Because when I go to meetings with the Victoria Harbour Commission, they're not interested in being a cargo container port. They're not interested in the conversation on food sustainability. Trust me, in a major disaster, they're all looking to Nanaimo. The growth, I want to hear the growth plan at the airport. The airport has a huge amount of land and some huge possibilities. And when I talked to David about it and what that looks like and what their growth can be, the logistics hub and the rail conversation are key and forefront at the top of the conversation. And so in previous renderings of this committee, we came forward with those 5 infrastructure pieces, but we have a list of 26 infrastructure pieces, quite frankly, that could be realized and discussed. And what I see what the Prosperity Corp is working on are actually pieces that fit inside of that with no overarching strategic plan. And I think what this group needs to do is work at putting that together. I think it means, first off, us determining a list of people who would be at the table in the discussion and starting with the discussion on share the key points of your strategic plan. I don't want like a half-day session on what the port strategic plan is or the healthcare. I want you get a half hour to share your strategic plan, the things that are the most important to you and that are most important and impactful to our community, as well as what you need. Because I can tell you, as we have the healthcare conversation, we need the university. We need them. We need First Nations, right? And we do have, the healthcare ecosystem has this grand vision of being this place where you come to Nanaimo and you can train as a doctor here. And imagine being the training center for First Nations doctors that transition into our tertiary hospital, which has a healthcare system base that is culturally appropriate for the community and the people who live here. That we could be a leader in Canada in that conversation. And I can tell you right now, we have people in Ottawa talking about how do we get some traction on a federal level in that healthcare conversation. So I know there's a lot of stuff in that piece that I talked about, but those of you who've worked with me before know that you know I dream big. And I've felt, the reason that I live, work, and raise my children here is because I've always felt the potential in our central area out-taps anywhere else in North America. This is the place to be. This is the place to invest, raise our families. And trust me, other people are noticing it because they're moving here in droves, right? They're retiring here. They're moving their families here. But the one thing I hear back, I sat down with Sheila Malcolmson before the election and I said, how come it took us 3 applications to get the Foundry program? How come we were the last to get it in BC? I'm sorry, you should have just given it to us, right? Everybody else was getting it. This is youth. There should be no exception for why it wasn't automatically given here. And her response was, well, because in your first application, 2 different groups made applications with conflicting views and you couldn't all get on the same page. And I was like, oh my goodness, right? And it took us 3 times to get on the same page. But if we had an overarching strategic plan that all of us were talking about, and this is the one change I have seen happen in my career lifetime here, is the power of working together as a team, right? In my own business, that's what I talk about with my guys. We're a team. It doesn't matter if you work for me directly, or if you're a trade, or if you're the WorkSafe inspector, or you're the building inspector. It takes all of us to build a project together. So we have to all work together. We have to all put our cards on the table, and when we have an issue, we have to bring it up, and we have to make an issue an opportunity. So the issues that the mayor mentioned today around Sunamo engagement, guess what? That's a massive opportunity for us. And I think we have willing partners out there that would be willing to speak with us. And as we work our way towards creating those strategic partnerships and opportunities, I think those opportunities will grow. And so that's my challenge for this committee. I know that it's a really high-level piece, but I actually think we have all the pieces now to actually do something like this and do it on a big scale and come out getting the recognition from people like the province and the federal government saying, oh, hey, look at what Nanaimo's doing. They're creating change. They have a strategic plan. They know who they are. They're engaging. We're not going to get every community citizen. We're going to have a percentage who are going to oppose us because that's how society is, and people are people. But I think there's a huge opportunity for us, and now that our Prosperity Corp has some legs, and you can see the pieces that they're working on, it would be great to have a strategic plan so that all these decisions moving forward fit somewhere within that strategic plan. That's what I have to say.
And that, folks, is why I just love Donna Hayes, and I mean that respectfully. Thank you. Mr. Horbaczewski.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Donna. I'm always captivated by when you talk and you explain your vision and what you want to do, and I'm really happy to hear it because as the chair of NPC. Colin and I and Ian, we would spend a lot of time, and the board, we spent a lot of time talking about what is our strategic vision and do we create our strategic plan. And through those conversations and where those priorities come from and I'm happy to see that you see the alignment, it was talking to the shareholders and taking that exact vision of the university has a strategic plan. So how does NPC support that strategic plan and create those opportunities? Same thing with the port, same thing with the airport, so all of those priorities align. We're very deliberate in taking that approach of coming together as an organization, recognizing the strengths of the shareholders around the table. So I'm, on behalf of NPC, I'm excited to hear that. I think it's a great next step. The city has demonstrated their support of NPC here recently with the budget, and so I know we are very eager to get things going. It took us a little while to get things up and running, as you would expect, but now we have since VIEA. We talk about VIEA as NPC's sort of coming out. And now Colin is very eager on to move a lot of these pieces forward. So I think continuing those conversations will be very important. From the university perspective, 100%. I think the university, we are in Nanaimo, we're very, very fortunate to have the university that we do. We're seeing from a domestic perspective, we've got the largest number of domestic students that we've had in the last 13 or 17 years. I can't remember what it is. So students are starting to come back to Nanaimo in droves. Your Worship, your comments around the IRCC and international, absolutely, we're being hammered, and I think where this table can support in having conversations with the province is understanding what the benefit of those international students bring to our community outside of just the diversity, but the need for workers. We train workers, and that's what we pride ourselves in. We're seeing a significant drop in international students. We're not getting a lot of information from the province yet because they're still trying to figure out what this all means. We don't even know how many international students we can accept next year yet. Election, new minister, all of those things are the reasoning. But it still remains, though, VIU is one of the least funded universities in the province. And when you look at the position, to your point of Nanaimo and Vancouver Island, we are the university north of the Malahat. We serve more than just Nanaimo. We have Duncan, we've got the Catholic region. not to mention all of our other sort of satellite opportunities and research centers that we have. So I think there is a conversation that that we can have with the province to recognize the power of Vancouver Island University and the benefit that it brings to this region and to the province and the island. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Mr. Moss?
You need to remember that Mr.
Yeah,
Whitty's
I was going to say, I would expect that Dave Whitty would not be a quiet person.
I do have comments. Bob, go ahead.
He's going to defer to his junior.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Donna, your vision for Nanaimo is wonderful as always, and I completely agree that we've got amazing opportunities as a community and as a city to move forward. And I would add one thing to your list, and that is, given our recent change of leadership in the United States, one of the things that Canada might consider doing going forward is to focus a bit more on Pacific Rim trade, which would be a wonderful opportunity for Nanaimo, and I would argue that we should be focused on that sooner rather than later. So I think that's another great opportunity we've got. And I'm all for doing new strategic plans and updating strategic plans. I would point out that the task force that helped with the formation of the Nanaimo Prosperity Corporation put together a strategic plan 4 years ago now, and I agree it needs to be updated. But I would also suggest that we need to be careful about spending too much time on the planning piece, and we need to focus very much on the bricks and mortar of getting things done. And of course, that would bring me back to housing again. I think we need to remember that as a city, we might need to reallocate some resources in order to tackle the key pieces that are causing us some grief. I mean, the whole housing thing affects not only community security, but also housing for employees. And I think we will all agree as we look around our community, no matter who the employer is, we're having trouble attracting new employees. And housing is only part of that discussion, but an important part. There's, obviously economic pieces that we need to talk about in terms of attracting employees as well. So I think, while updating our strategic plan is important, we also need to drill down and focus on some of the key tools that we need in order to put it in place. And I believe that's something that this committee could do, highlight what those issues are, and maybe help suggest how we can maybe reallocate some resources. I do understand that there's only so many dollars to go around at the city level, but perhaps we need to think about how we spend those, and maybe we should shift some of those priorities. So at that, I'll leave it for the moment.
Thanks very much, Bob. David?
Sure, thank you. Obviously, I have a lot of thoughts around this. Donna, great job summarizing broadly the kinds of direction we need to go. One of the lessons is, I'm an urbanist and spent much of my life working with communities across the country and internationally. And one of the lessons I've learned in that time is that that broader visionary founding discussions are absolutely critical to successful long-term growth and sustainable development, et cetera, et cetera. My lesson for me is that rather than use the term strategic plan, I think there's a nuance there, that there's a city, Freiburg, Germany, that's considered leading in just every aspect of urban development, sustainable development, green city, blah, 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 you name it. They're in the forefront. And when I met with them about 5 years ago now, they've got what they call a charter. So it's the same, notionally, it's the same thing, but it's even broader than a strategic plan, a charter, which has embedded within it the broader principles. And they developed it in the same manner that you've described, Donna. But I would urge us to just step back a little bit and look at that. And I'd be pleased to share my knowledge of what they've done and how they did it. But notionally, I like the idea, but I wouldn't call it a strategic plan, because that's just notionally, that just people just roll their eyes, right? But a charter is a little bit different, but fundamentally, it's about what you were talking about. So one, I do that. Secondly, I think that so 3 months in, 10 countries, you name, I don't know how many cities, 20 cities, whatever. I'll come back to my notion that if you don't get the details right, the broader stuff doesn't happen. And for me, the detail is making sure people are housed. I have, in the travels I've done, and you may have seen one of the last articles I wrote in the News Bulletin, Nanaimo's homelessness is the worst I've seen. And if I can be honest with you, coming back, both Cindy and I come back with significant hesitancy, because we know what we're going to see. And when you compare what others have done and what others are doing and what needs to be done in Canada, and Nanaimo is really trying hard. But if as a country we cannot address this issue, which is an existential crisis, which you do not see in any way, shape, or form in the same way as you do in Canada and the US, and then everything we do at a broader strategic level, I think, cannot achieve what it should achieve without addressing housing, which is part of the housing crisis, which is part of the homelessness crisis. And I wax on like this, as you know, talked about it a lot, quite frustrated by it. I'll report back that the motion that we took out of the mayor's leaders table that went to council, the council endorsed, that went to SBO, never heard from SBO. They were asked to look at the 5 recommendations, never heard from them. So those kinds of issues for me are really personal now, and really really troubling, because we just don't seem to be able to address what is just a basic human right, and that's housing. And in the absence of that, all of the good measures we do, all of the strategic plans we do, all of the great economic development work we do, just can't get rooted in a way it should and benefit in the way it should. So, and the issue is the federal and provincial governments. And that's, for me, the key issue. And surely we can somehow, we've advocated, and Bob and I have talked about this, why can't Nanaimo be the leader in bringing them and driving them to the table, not bringing them, driving them to the table. And through that, start a trend across the country that actually finally addresses this. SBO, yeah, structured, great, it's got great ambitions, but for me, it's just not enough. And we just need to, somebody somewhere needs to grab this, because 3 months of traveling, countries as diverse as Vietnam, to Japan, to South Korea, to little old Cambodia, for God's sakes, to Singapore, to Indonesia, to Australia, and now New Zealand. We're failing like probably the worst in the world in terms of a percentage and ability to deal with this. So Canada is taking leadership in homelessness. That's what I see. And I think it's absolutely pathetic and sad. And for me, to achieve those big dreams, we need to take care of our own as well. That's my suggestion. And the mayor, you talked about modular home coming in and talking to you. It's something that Bob and I have been talking about. I've got a master's student that we're working together on this, that there's a huge opportunity for Nanaimo to take leadership in that. to help address that. So there are these little pieces, but then there's the big pieces. They all need to come together. And for me, as long as we have homelessness for failing. Thank you.
Nicely put, Dave, and if I may say, as we approach the Christmas season, I've often thought of it this way, that you have your family gathered around the table, but there's one member of your family who is only seen once a year. They live in poverty, they're invited to the table, so to speak, but that's pretty much it, and then they're forgotten for the rest of the year. And quite candidly, I don't know how anyone sits around a family table if they see one member of the family living in misery. And that's really where we're at as a country, city, province, however you want to phrase it. Your point's well taken. I'm not suggesting you're being negative, though, but I will say this. I think it's pretty clear from the voting patterns and who won and who lost in various places in this province that the provincial government has probably had a pretty salutary wake-up call on this. And I think the numbers of Conservatives who were elected who, and no disrespect to the Conservative Party, were obscure candidates, fresh faces, unknown, the number of new members who've been elected generally to the BC legislature. I have some reason for optimism that maybe it's finally going to get the attention it really deserves. And to come back to something that Donna reminded us of this morning, I think the selection of Brenda Bailey as finance minister is a really positive step. Successful entrepreneur, local gal, VIU, mom taught up there, knows the turf. That's a very positive step because candidly, Treasury Board is still where it's at. And I think she's got the kind of steel in her spine that she's not going to necessarily take directions from some central authority in the Premier's office if it's not seen as being beneficial and important for the community. But your point is well taken. We can't move forward, and you're quite right. I get what you said today, and I'm not diminishing it when I say it. It's amazing how many people in the last few weeks have talked about having traveled somewhere this year internationally and come back and said the same thing. It smacks you in the face when you return home to beautiful Nanaimo that they didn't see this wherever it was, whether it was Europe or the Far East or other countries. Donna.
Dave, I just actually want to make a couple quick comments. The first is, for whatever reason, the SPO has reached out to me this last week and has asked, I've asked them to wait till the new year for a meeting, but has asked for a meeting to talk about what their vision is for community, to see if there's any overlay. And I'm not sure why they contacted me, like if it's my healthcare work or my port work or what, or just my job, to find out what. So I will take that opportunity to find out where they're at, since you're saying you didn't hear back from them, and pass on any information that I get there. The second thing was at the Premier's luncheon on, I'm saying it was Wednesday. I can't remember what I do every day of the week, but unless I look back. Anyways, I had the opportunity of sitting with Minister Young. And so my understanding is, Mayor, is he mentioned that he is either already arranged it with your staff or yourself and is planning on coming to Nanaimo. So he recognizes the homeless issue that is in Nanaimo. He spoke directly to it. And, you know, there were 3 of us from Nanaimo at the table, but there were people from, we had the home builders, the chair of the BC Home Builders Association, for instance, was at our table, and some other groups. So we had quite a talk actually about homelessness, and because he's the Minister of State of Community Safety and Integrated Services. And so my understanding is he plans on coming to Nanaimo in the very near future to have these conversations and get feedback from us and talk about possible opportunities for us as a community. So I took that as encouraging, and that the province, there was recognition there that we had a significant issue here, and they planned on coming here to have a conversation. So just what I've heard this week alone.
I think that one of the things that's driving this, and it's not anything to be happy about, is that there have been so many news stories out of Nanaimo. But at the same time, I'm conscious of the fact that when you look at Courtenay, proportionately, they have way more unhoused people than the city of Nanaimo per capita. Courtenay's what, 15, 20,000, if that? And they have something approaching 300. Almost a third of our unhoused population. It is pretty dramatic, and for those of you who go through or to Courtenay recently, it's dreadfully apparent. And I think the fact that that seat was a government seat and is now an opposition seat, and the seat north of it does send a message. It's why I'm somewhat optimistic. politicians do pay attention to votes, and the selection was as I say, I think a pretty clear indication that people want things fixed and they are not prepared to tolerate it continuing. And when you have a minority government with that close a margin, you'd be hard pressed, you can't make it any closer, then you've got a challenge. I shouldn't call it a minority government, in fairness. It is a majority of one, so to speak. Amounts to the same thing.
Don't get the flu.
Don't get the flu, don't get sick, or don't get mad and cross the floor. In terms of going forward, I mean, I want to thank all of you this morning for what I will call a renewed sense of enthusiasm. I think, and I'm just going to throw out some suggestions in terms of the plans, so to speak, and I like Dave's concept of a charter. And when you use the term charter, I think of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You establish law based on the terms of that charter. Everything follows from it. May well be merit in that concept, but I think perhaps it's time to compare all the visions, and literally it can be as simple as getting those documents from the various organizations, et cetera, and bodies, and spending some time during the holidays reading them with a view to just gaining a better understanding, and as Richard said, see where we intersect, so to speak. And it's more than a shopping list, but a shopping list is definitely part of it. Because that firstly indicates that you've thought about what you have to do. No meal gets put together unless you have a shopping list and you know what the ingredients have to be. So that's a crucial part. In terms of how we proceed, generally though, I'm please open to comments from everybody. What do we plan to do at the next meeting, so to speak? Where are we going? Donna?
So two things. I just actually want to make a comment that might be interesting because the shopping list comment is interesting. I was at a meeting yesterday where it was mentioned that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank is a little bit panicked. They have money that they have not invested. They're way below their targeted amounts. And with what the sounds and the winds flowing in Ottawa look like right now, they're worried about what may happen with the change of government where they haven't lived up to necessarily their mandate. I actually had the opportunity a year and a half ago to sit down with the head of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. I had to go to Toronto to do that. But, their guidelines were 200 million was their project limit. They required to have private partners. There were some conditions in it, none of them which were unattainable. But I would suggest that a list coming out of this group will be big because our infrastructure deficits here are large. But I think there might be some other opportunities that maybe we take a look at, because if that, the one thing is that the reason the port was having the conversation at that time is because of our $120 million project at Duke Point, and obviously we didn't meet the 200 million minimum. Are they changing those guidelines? I have somebody looking into that right now, but there might be some opportunities there. So I'm just putting that, as you mentioned, the shopping list. I think maybe some of those bigger discussions, there might be some other opportunities for us as a community. For me, next steps would be actually compiling a list of who we're asking strategic plans from, because I want to be very conscientious that at the infrastructure table, we were very diverse, as Dave will remember. Not only did we have the groups that I've spoken about, but we had the arts and cultures people, we had the not-for-profit people, we had all those various groups, and I want to make sure that and housing, they were, that's why I think we have 5 housing projects alone now. 3 of them are from First Nations that actually deserve some more conversation. But I want to make sure that we're not leaving them out of the conversation. My only comment would be is that whoever comes to the table isn't every individual group. It's one person or one organization under which hopefully they have a voice to be able to sit down and say, this is what the main issue facing us is. This is what our goal would be. But I think it would behoove us to sit down through Christmas here and maybe each of us go back and say, what are those various organizations that we think we should be looking at that make up our community, and come back with some names to the table in the new year. The request can go out before. We could do that digitally. I don't think we need to have a meeting to come up with those names. We can do it in amongst ourselves. And then We could request those strategic plans so that we can have those review before we come back to the next meeting. I do believe it will require us to have a longer session at some point. I can tell you that the Hospital Foundation Board has already approved doing this concept in some form, and also believed we have to have people in the room to share, take 20 minutes, share their condensed version of their master plan after we've had a chance to read through it and can ask questions, and then do an event like that. That would be.
May I jump in, Donna? I like where you're going, but I would suggest, based on my anyway.
Dave, don't be shy about, David, sorry, don't be shy about raising your voice a bit.
Okay, sorry. I'm just sitting here in this weird space, but I think that it's important to do that. I really think what I'd like to see us do is, if we agree that notionally this charter idea, we should explore, and I'm prepared to come and provide an overview of that Freiburg one and others that have led to the kinds of things you're talking about, Donna. That if we, I think the next meeting would be helpful to have a sense of who are the people involved, but more particularly, what does the charter look like if we agree with that notion, and then what form does it take, and what does it look like, and aspirationally, and then I think we have the two things coming together. I would suggest that. I think that would be the next really important step. Like, what does this look like when we finish it? The overarching, as you called it before, strategic plan, because it really, in my view, needs to be something other than a strategic plan, but and something based on what we know works elsewhere. Great believer in looking at what others do and taking the winners and applying them.
I'm not seeing any disagreement around the table, and moreover, I think that there's some good news in the sense that I'm not the record keeper and wouldn't know how to get into a computer even if it had a door that said open. Having said that, I know somewhere there'll be a list of the organizations, people, et cetera, who were invited to the initial meetings when this original Mayor's Leaders Table was proposed, and that would certainly help. The good news is that a couple of things have come into being since then, including the Prosperity Corporation and the SBO that didn't exist before. So I think there's that will hopefully save a fair bit of time in terms of who we ask or who's appropriate to consider. Mr. Sims.
Thanks, Your Worship. I jotted down, sort of as the conversation was going, just a few that came through, and I wondered, diversity is a good thing, but also if you have too many diverse voices, it becomes cumbersome. So I'm trying to figure out how that might work.
When does a meeting become a riot?
That's right. When somebody mentions 15-minute cities. So some of the organizations I just jotted down really quickly was BIU, SFN, of course, the Prosperity Corporation, Fair Care Alliance, the city itself, of course. We've got our own, council has its own strategic direction, the Port Authority, the airport, the Hospital Foundation. So that was sort of the core that I was jotting as, but there's probably school district. Thank you. Yeah, if Mark had been sitting here, I would have probably clued in on that one.
Richard.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Again, just on that, how do you keep it so that it's unruly and yet get a good representation of everyone? When you look at, because you want to have the voice of the social agencies, you want to have the voice of the arts and cultures, but there's so many of those organizations that I'm just looking at the chamber, and there is a sort of a community impact group that meets, and there's 38 people represented on that group, and that's everyone that's there. So is there an opportunity to leverage through the chamber, to attend one of those meetings or to get some feedback from that group? Because you want to hear from that group. So that's sort of where my thinking was.
It's a really good point. A lot of their members are the not-for-profits and many of the arts and culture people.
Yeah.
And I mean, Jan Call is incoming
Chair.
I'm having lunch with her on Monday. and she sits on Prosperity.
Yeah.
And she works in the healthcare field, so, yeah, that's a good idea.
When you mentioned the number 38, I couldn't help but think of Councillor Hemmons chairing VRL, the Van Cortlandt Regional Library Board,
Good luck with that.
and understanding completely the challenges that presents. Mr. Moss.
Maybe I just jump in.
Sorry, David, please.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if I may suggest too, that if there's a notion of cities that have had successful charters, that we look at the groups that they've involved and to make sure that, there's a level of depth, but also a breadth that seems reasonable. Again, lessons from others, right?
Yeah, good point.
Thank you. Bob?
Thank you. The one suggestion I have is that as we move forward, I'd like to propose that we specifically set aside some time of each meeting to talk about specific actions that we can take as a city to realize on some of those goals and objectives. I fully support strategic planning, but at some point we need to talk about how we get things done. And I think it's really important that we set that as an objective. Thanks.
I like it. Councillor Hemmons, present, knows I've said this from time to time. We often spend a fair bit of discussion around the council table talking about the environment, reducing carbon footprint and all those things. And I just often say rather cheekily, why don't we just plant a few trees each week, basically? While we're talking, it will actually achieve something tangible and it's real and people can see it. And I think that's what you're driving at. While we're pursuing the perfect, let's do some good along the way too. Yeah.
Worship, one of the thoughts for input, and maybe it's to the whole reimagine process, was intensive community input. So that really creates the background for a lot of what the community's thinking. And now the community leadership is really trying to, as Donna sort of talked about, is to come up with this charter, which is this overall, who is Nanaimo kind of thing. But we have a lot of that background already built. So maybe that's do I use the word bypass? I don't know, maybe we're a shortcut around the idea of trying to rehash having 38 people sitting at the table, all trying to get, a few words into a strategic plan or a charter. We've got that data. And I was struck as we went through that process, because we started the process with the concept of unity, cohesion, just even within the organization. We didn't want to have, engineering, public works doing their transportation plan over here, planning doing their thing over here, and parks doing their, it was just a really cohesive. But then that thread kept on through. We heard the things we heard from the community, or some of the things that we thought ourselves, that council was already thinking and moving on. So there was, and then when you go out to the community, there's this quite enthusiastic uptake. So the reality is, we've got the vision. It just maybe need to repackage it and align it with what some of the other organizations are doing. I would be really surprised if VIU's vision was wildly divergent from what we heard in city plan, wildly divergent from the airport or the Port Authority. So I'm predicting some cohesion there already, but that's just a thought.
All right, folks. Think we know where we're going? David, anything further?
Yes. No, I like the conversation. I think it's interesting. I think what happens is that, go down a number of roads and then inevitably pull back and you see all the pieces. It's a matter of pulling them together. I agree with Bill. There's been all kinds of great work done in the city and it's a matter of kind of pulling that together. And it's not that it's not going to be nothing's ever easy, but I think that it's maybe less challenging than we might realize, and in my view, it's quite doable. And I think that foundation and the discussion that started this, Donna, thanks for that. I think bodes well for the future. And through that, I think that as a city, I think we would end up a little more strength to deal with the other levels of government. I think fundamentally that's the challenge for us, isn't it? That we're such a big country. We're so bloody diverse, and governance is so scattered. And at the end of the day, you know, if it doesn't work in our communities, it doesn't work. And one of the things that doesn't work in our communities is the homeless crisis. And if we can deal with the bigger stuff and deal with some of that fundamental stuff, we're in good shape. And until we have the conversation, which we're doing now, we'll never resolve any of it. So this is a really positive conversation. So I feel much better. Thank you.
Ditto. Couldn't agree more. And what you've said is what I've heard from some much sager, older, wiser, probably dead people now. Canada has too much geography, too few people, and too little history. And that's a challenge for us. All right, if I'm seeing nothing further, no new business, believe it or not, a motion to adjourn. Moved Mr. Horpachewski, seconded Ms. Hayes. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Thank you very much, everyone. This has been a very positive morning. Merry Christmas to each and every one of you. And as Tiny Tim observed, and it used to drive the communications people when I'd say it for my MLA message. And as Tiny Tim observed, God bless.